Disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect those of the Faculty of Education, Simon Fraser University.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Ideas, Innovative Dialogues in Educational Approaches and Scholarship podcast series in the Research Hub at the Faculty of Education, Simon Fraser University. My name is Shaila and I'm your host. I would like to acknowledge that all Ideas podcasts are recorded at Simon Fraser University, whose 3 campuses are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam nations. Listeners, we are very happy. I am personally very happy and very grateful to welcome Derek Rasmussen to this show today. Here is a little bio of Derek. Derek Rasmussen, a recent PhD graduate from the Faculty of Education, SFU, is an anti-war and social justice activist, meditation teacher, and legal researcher. In the 1980s, he helped found the Alliance for Nonviolent Action, ANVA, and the first Canada-wide East Timor Group. He was a member of the Cruise Missile Conversion Project, organizing and participating in several civil disobedience blockades, trying to convert Lytton's missile factory in Mississauga to peaceful production. He also organized a Toronto NYC Peace Walk. During this time, he trained under mentors Ken Hancock, Len Dorash, Claire Cullen, Noam Chomsky, Ivan Illich, and Phil Berrigan. He lived in Nunavut for 12 years, researching lawsuits against Canada's violation of Inuit rights, including their right to teach their children in the Inuit language, a right which the public territorial government removed 5 years ago. Derek has also written about education as a tool to de-indigenize. Most recently, he is one of the co-authors of the Science for the People report, It Takes a Village to Kill a Child, which details Canadian companies making parts for US-Israeli F-35 jets bombing Gaza. This report was submitted to the United Nations Human Rights Council at the end of the last year, the same week he defended his PhD thesis at SFU. His thesis on the 4 immeasurables in Buddhist meditation, that is, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, contrasted how they're taught today with how they were initially taught by the Buddha. He also discussed the application of these meditations to support peace and social justice activists. He is one of the core teachers at the Dharma Center of Canada. Derek has written for a variety of journals and mainstream newspapers and has chapters in 8 books. His writings are archived at academia.edu. Hello, Derek. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Hi, Shaila. Thanks for having me.
Derek, so from your bio, as I just read out, you are a philosopher, a teacher, a researcher. You're a lot of things. You're an activist. I think the recent time demands an examination of how we see and how we understand education. So from your decade-long experiences in various activists, anti-war and social justice activism, and your research, which focuses on appreciative joy and kindness and love. So I would like to know from you your understanding of what is education and what is its purpose.
Yeah, thanks, Shaila. Well, I think we have to separate maybe the what we're told education is for and what we hope it might be for with what institutional education actually is and does. And part of the reason I mentioned my mentors, in the bio, is because a lot of the learning I think we do is vast and outside of institutional contexts. In one of the pieces I wrote many years ago on de-indigenizing education, and that is like how education de-indigenizes people. I talked about the concept of learning as ocean and tap, and that there's an ocean of learning. I mean, human being isn't born with all the learning it needs. There's just limitations. As Karen Egan used to say, a great professor at Simon Fraser I studied with, he said there's, the human body can only have a cranium of a certain size go through. And so there's only so much knowledge inside the brain of the child. And, it's the nature-nurture question. There's almost so much of what we need to know we have to learn. And all this learning is going on through the community, through the vast web of human relations, and then our relationships with the environment and nature and so on. So there's this vast learning. But like an ocean, the institutional education process is the tap. That's where it comes out and gets certified. And I once suggested, sort of half jokingly, that there's this restaurant theory of education, which is, that there might be, we don't actually acknowledge it as such. There might be food everywhere that we can eat if you're in nature, but we believe that we can only get it from the restaurant, from the school or the college or the university. So if you don't, so when educational anthropologists are studying a society, if they don't see things that look like schools or colleges, they think there's no education going on there. They'll say that, which is kind of like them studying a society and not finding any restaurants and then saying, oh, they must not eat. It's ridiculous. Of course they do. There's learning going on everywhere. This is part of what the human being is. We're a learning organism. But the educational institution itself has two functions, really. It works in two ways, as a glue and as a solvent. Now, as a glue, it's meant to put us together in a certain way to serve the interests of the nation state. And as one of the prominent sociologists defined the nation state many years ago, to me, in a shocking definition that I first heard in a first-year sociology class at Trent University with 700 students. And we blithely sat there while the professor said the nation state is the entity that has the monopoly on organized violence. And that was, I thought, we really all accept this and societies accept that this is the way it works. Then as you go on, you realize, oh, this is the way it works. And so the nation state wants to produce human beings who will align with its purposes, and principally the purposes of its business elites, to help them get richer and take stuff from other people. So I think probably the most powerful expression of this, I remember reading when, I was in first year university, and again, it wasn't on the reading list of the courses at Trent. I stumbled into it in a used bookstore. It was Jonathan Kozol's book, The Night is Dark and I'm Far From Home. And he said, education is not an inept, failing structure, as people frame it as. It's an ice-cold, superb machine. Its function is not to educate, but to make, and I always remember this quote, manageable voters, manipulable consumers, and willing killers. And by any measure, if you use that measure, and that's the first of its major functions, is the glue function, I think it's working very well. This is a very sad statement. But and we might get into that, but I think it's an unavoidable issue to raise, is that the lack of dissent in the society when a genocide is being carried out, and the conformity that's enforced across the society, is largely a product of the education system. Of course, the media play into it, but the education system is the primary defense against a moral, courageous, populous people doing what they ought to be doing. And so that's the glue function, is creating that kind of direction for education. And then I'd say the second function, which you really observe anytime we live in any length of time amongst or discuss the nature of colonialism with the host peoples, we begin to see the solvent function. You have to ask the question, in this last year as Prime Minister in 2014-15, the Stephen Harper budget, Conservative Party, their largest single item in their budget, in the billions of dollars, was Indigenous education. And it was only discussed in one place. The Center for Policy Alternatives put out a paper discussing this and why this might be. Why would that Conservative government put all that money into education for Indigenous people? Are they very altruistic? Are they concerned about the well-being of Indigenous people? No. The only way to get at stuff under the feet of Indigenous people is to dissolve their bond with the ground. You have to dissolve their connection to the land so you can get at the stuff under their feet, which is what we want as colonial occupiers and thieves. Essentially, all this complicated language we learn in university, it's just about theft. We're stealing stuff. And so this dissolving function is one that doesn't get analyzed very much. And I was turned towards this by Ivan Illich, the great philosopher and thinker who wrote the book Deschooling Society. And that was on the curriculum at Trent University, interestingly, when I started. But it wasn't in an education department. It was in the sociology department. That's where I was assigned that book to read. And that had a huge effect on me. And then meeting him a few years later and having conversations with him, that had a huge effect. Because he actually leveled a challenge at the World Conference of Education Societies in the Sorbonne in 1984. So that's like 41 years ago, right? He begged all the educators there to study education under the assumption of scarcity. That's what he said. And then 10 years later, in an interview with CBC Radio, David Cayley, that's been turned into a book, he admits, he goes, I failed completely. Nobody's ever done it. No one's studying education under the assumption of scarcity. And this is what I mean about restaurant theory of education, or ocean and tap, that learning is everywhere, but education is created as this scarce phenomena that's very difficult to get access to, and that's only done by special people. And the area that interests me is how there's all this theorizing about isolating the education function and the content, distilling it from the people, creating units of it to transfer to others, and then so this is like extracting the educational content, severing it from its land and people, distilling it into curricula, transferring it, creating specialized people like you and I who get special credentials, meaning we're the ones allowed to transfer this distillate to the units that need it, and then putting it into the units. This is a little bit of Freire and Illich combined. And then later, as Freire would say, testing the units to see how much remains inside them, right? How successful our transfer was. So I call this hydroponic education, right? Which hydroponic literally means growing things in a soilless culture. Well, that's what we're doing. We're growing people in a soilless culture with no connection to the land. And this, you can see why something like this is super helpful to all the colonial powers worldwide, if they want to uproot Indigenous people from their connection and prevent them from protecting the land that they live amongst. and allow us to get access to the stuff under their feet. We've never cared about who the indigenous people are. We just want the stuff under their feet. So this hydroponic education, growing people in a soilless culture, is the solvent part and the glue part. That's what we do. And, it's super unusual. And it's amazing we don't talk about this in our faculties very much, but because one of the things I heard repeatedly in Nunavut and amongst my Inuit friends is how just absolutely bizarre it is to age segregate human infants into separate groups of units in cement buildings under fluorescent lights to administer this foreign set of ideas that are concretized into paper in a foreign language, and then certify them to come out into the world and essentially become servants of that foreign system. It's frankly, it's just amazing that it isn't discussed in plain terms like this, that this is what education does. And of course, if it's successful, it does the other part that Kozal said. It turns them into manageable consumers and manipulated voters and willing killers. And this is maybe, I hope it's not too harsh for your listeners to give that appraisal of how the system works, but that's what I think education does.
Wow. Thanks, Derek, for sharing your thoughts with us. And these are very, very insightful thoughts and really, really thought-provoking concepts and ideas. We are not trained to see education in this way at all. But like as we were talking about before we started the recording, that in this current era, with everything that is going on, climate crisis, war, violence, genocide, modern, artificial intelligence development. So probably we are at a crossroad of a crisis. And as educators, or maybe we are already in a crisis, kind of an existential crisis. And as educators, we need to see and think what we are doing and how we can, how we can envision education in a different way, in another way, that is going to establish social justice. That is going to establish, bring back peace and love back to the world. So thank you for sharing your thoughts and understanding. And here, I think I want to ask you about your thesis, because you said how we see education, but your thesis is very, very interesting. And I think this may give us some indications, some directions. So I want to know more about your work. In your thesis, and as it is also mentioned in your bio, you talk about Buddhist meditation, and you also practice meditation and help others to practice. You're a teacher. So how does a meditative mind contribute to a holistic understanding of the fragmented modern world? And in other words, education as well, because you said the way education is cultivated is a hydroponic culture, hydroponic education. So how do we get to a holistic understanding of the world? How do we provide holistic education to the children for the next generation? How do you all do all this? And I think just because of what time we're living in, the responsibility sort of falls on our shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, again, before we started recording, you said, what we all want to see is a way of living where we're helping create and support communities and generations of courageous and moral people. And, that's, I think, what a lot of the idealism around education is. We think it's a process to produce a courageous and moral person. And then we butt up against the reality of how these systems work. Chomsky once called them interlocking systems of oppression. And I have to say, from the outset, I came to Buddhist meditation in an emergency state. I mean, I'd done civil disobedience and worked with peace activists and blockaded a missile factory in Toronto. And then I was working with colleagues on the trying to oppose the genocide in East Timor. Excuse me. And I don't know about other folks, but I didn't feel like I had any kind of tools to help me to sustain me as an activist. And so I went because the advice of actually one of my profs at Trent, my mentor, Bill Phelan, again in the sociology department there, he suggested I go meet with meditation teachers. He mentioned one in particular who ended up being the one I studied with, who founded the Dharma Center of Canada, a Canadian Buddhist meditation teacher who was also an anarchist and labor organizer and so on. And I think, although I think it's important to talk about the role of of spiritual practices to sustain us, and that's what I focused on in my thesis. I think uh, the other part that is linked to what we were talking about a minute ago is rebuilding or reestablishing the learning and community aspect of how we are as a society. And the unfortunate reality is that this siloing and isolating of us, separating us into individuals or hyper individualism now with the screen kind of processes of life is designed to make us better workers and to keep us in our lane, serving the capitalist economy. And you saw that super strongly with the pandemic, where basically the political and economic elite allowed us a little break when we were under threat, and then realized the economy wasn't making them any money while we were all essentially back at home and with our families and kids, and back in as much as we could be, and saw people went out in nature, they did things outdoors, right? And pretty quickly, the political economic elite, particularly in the U.S. and Canada and the Western industrial world, said, "Oh no, we can't have this. If they're not at work, the system isn't making us any money, and we can't put them to work unless we have a place to park their kids. So we've got to get the schools open so we can park their kids and get them back into factories and back into workplaces." This is what the system said. The pandemic was just laid it bare, that how education and economy work together. So that I should have probably said there was this third function, which is unfortunately kind of brutal and almost just geographic of education, which is we need a place to park kids so we can put the working adults 20 to 60 years old into factories and workplaces and make money for the elites that run everything. And so that's the other aspect of what we've just been through. And so this is partly why I think spiritual communities are important, because of the congregation function, bringing people together. They're a place, we have to look at the places outside of the institutional levers that give us something to kind of bring us back together as a human family, as human families, and to build community and to reestablish the learning we do amongst each other. This is the part of, I think, that doesn't get studied when everybody assumes the tap and ocean part. We only look at the tap part of education. I assume in your community, there's all sorts of learning that goes on amongst your family and elders and siblings, right? This is the thing Inuit friends would repeatedly be offended and upset by. Interestingly, probably most upset by when I would talk to them about the Western industrial education system is the separating of siblings from each other, that you can't teach your brothers and sisters, and that there's a role we have with our family members as teachers and learners. And this whole thing is just taken away and only given to credentialed outsiders. Often, if you're in the North, they're often, 25-year-old white people from Brampton coming up to teach in the North. It's ridiculous. So to get back to your question, for me at the outset, I was looking for something to help in case I was locked up for a long period of time. It was kind of individualistic, and unfortunately, Buddhist meditation is very individualistic the way it's taught in the West. So it was kind of the thing I turned to as a practice you could do on your own. And it doesn't necessarily, the Buddhist meditation as it's given in the West isn't really, there isn't a lot of emphasis on community and collective and doing things together. There are parts of it that are, but especially if you're in a Buddhist country where it's culturally Buddhist and it's, of course, totally braided, embedded with the culture, then it's an entire community activity. But in the West, it's been much like many of the other activities we do, it's been kind of hijacked and modeled on individualistic, hyper competitive, accomplishing, practices. So sort of, the joke is, well, it was a 55-minute meditation session, but I finished it in 5. It's like, it's terrible. And so, back on the current genocide, I have to say probably the Buddhist community might be the worst or one of the worst in terms of the religious communities who haven't spoken out at all. You look at the previous pope and various congregations, the Congregation of Black Ministers in the United States that spoke up against the U.S. support for the Israeli genocide or spoke up against that U.S.-Israeli genocide in Palestine as early as the December of 2023. But the Buddhist community has been frankly, just obscenely silent. And so for all I have studied Buddhist meditation and I recommend it. I think it's really needs to be done, a practice done in concert with others. And there needs to be an emphasis on the third refuge the Buddha talked about, which is Sangha or congregation or community. And that doesn't get much attention. There's a lot of focus on teachers and meditation practices, but they're mostly, frankly, they suffer from the same limitation that institutional education does. They're hyper-individualistic, and they're not concerned even particularly with social justice or, the way you put it a few minutes ago, producing a courageous or moral community and people. So when I joined, though, my teacher, who I've been referred to, he said that if you're going to do activism for the long term, you should focus on these 4 meditations. And then it happened to be that I was in retreat when 9/11 happened, and we were sealed. So we didn't know. What I mean is we were sealed into the retreat center with, in silence with no phones or anything like that. And he came into the class on the day of the attacks and said, this terrible thing has happened. And the United States will try to turn this into a war. He was very prescient in that way. He said, and we need to practice. We all need to meditate. And he said, the imams and priests and rabbis and lamas will all pray. And it won't be enough, because here he was adapting a line from the Bible. He said, it won't be enough, because heaven is more moved by the prayers of one sinner than the prayers of 1,000 saints. And seeing as I was one of 25 people in the retreat that day, I thought, well, I'm probably a sinner. Maybe he means me. I have to do the work. And then he said, the practice where I want the center to do is the 4 immeasurables, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, and do it ceaselessly. I'd just like the center to devote itself to this practice. And so 3 of the teachers on site ended up teaching sequentially, and I ended up teaching that practice for 100 days straight and stayed in retreat for 6 months doing that practice after 9/11. And that's where I really got an in-depth appreciation of this practice. How it works. And it wasn't until I came out of that retreat and then spoke to a very eminent Buddhist scholar, probably one of the most prominent translators alive, named Bhikkhu Analayo, we discussed this practice and how we did it in this directional method of radiating this feeling. And he was shocked to find that I'd done that method, which he said was the original way the Buddha taught it. And he said, nobody teaches that anymore, except for him, he thought. And then I said, no, my teacher taught it. He learned it in Burma. And that's the method. And this eminent scholar said, I thought there was only one person teaching it today, and now I know there were two. So that led me to the idea of studying this. Why is it not taught that way? And what are the possible benefits of it? And how did it get kind of extinguished as a method? So that's what I wrote my thesis about. And then in particular, I noticed when I surveyed literature that there was a lot of documentation and study on loving kindness and compassion, and a little bit on equanimity, but almost none on appreciative joy. And my teacher, when he had initially met me and we discussed my activism and his political activism, he said, this is the one you should focus on. He said, if you're an activist, you have overdeveloped radar for what's going wrong, for wrongdoing. You see a lot of, if you're intelligent and you have a good heart, most people can see what's going wrong. And what we need to do for balance for that is to develop the radar for what's going right, for the good, the victories in people's lives. The non-zero sum, what I mean is things that don't come at the expense of others, but there's just always, children, having fun and playing, and people having success, and someone getting engaged. And there's just lots of reasons to see and appreciate the joy and the successes of others, successes that aren't coming at anyone's expense, that aren't hurting others. We're not talking about getting a new car or something, but things that are really meaningful. And it's the point is to develop the discipline of noticing that, cultivating that feeling, and also talking to others about it. This is an idea I heard from my friend Tommy Akalukchuk in Nunavut, when he called me once to tell me about a family member who'd done really well at something. And he said his father had told him to call his friends and tell them, because this was Inuksuk, the idea of positive gossip, that you should talk about the good that happens third hand to people others might not even know. This is an obvious social virtue in small Inuit communities where you hear about the good that people have done. It's a way of kind of bonding people together. Anyway, that was one of the ways I saw this idea of appreciative joy manifest in a practical kind of social behavior. And that's another thing I'd like to say, is that I think a lot of these meditative tools that we might find in our different spiritual traditions are, we have to acknowledge they're abundant in the indigenous communities that we live amongst. But of course, we may not be admitted to them or be allowed to know about them, but they're there. Or more likely, our colonial culture has tried to suppress or destroy them. So, that's where I think the thesis, the study has been helpful to me. Yeah.
Thanks again, Derek. I really like how you mentioned, and I think it really makes a lot of sense, the importance of developing community, a sangha, congregation, and the power that lies within a community, the intergenerational contact, teaching, passing on learning and teaching from our previous generation to us, not in institutional settings, for the traditional knowledge and the experiences that people have accumulated just by living a life in the world. So taking a step outside of the institutions and looking on what is going outside, and appreciate people's knowledge and experience and their understanding of life. I think my grandma, who has never stepped into a school, is the most compassionate person I have ever seen, I've ever met with.
Exactly. And if I could just segue off of that, And this is not to, here, I don't want to come across as someone who's, just going to be super critical of white people and, Western society. But I often sort of half jokingly say it's so easy when you're in an indigenous community to, well, it's not easy because often they hide their identities, but you can tell who the elders are.
Mm.
And if you're in downtown Toronto today, tell me how you would figure out who the elders are.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. It's also the capitalistic mechanism of a society where you always need to be, I'm drawing on from what you said, where you always need to be seen as somebody who can produce,
Hmm.
who can still give back. And that giving back is always measured against age, strength of the body. So as long as people can give back, but not in the term of people who is an elder who is giving back knowledge and compassion and love and the care that a community and a family would need to grow. So our not recognizing these values as something important, rather something which can always be transformed into a product,
Hmm.
something that can be measured against monetary value. As a society, we are more drawn toward that kind of activities and productivity. And in the end, we end up kind of respecting and valuing those kind of activities, those kind of productions, not the other one that I think are innate. Humans are born with these qualities, but we do not practice. So
Hmm.
something happens, something goes wrong that we forego this kind of values, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right on. And, you just said measured and monetized.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we see the capitalist system focusing on, measuring and monetizing.
Yeah.
Uh, you can't measure and monetize your grandmother's compassion. And
Mhm.
and it won't be valued by a capitalist society. So
Yeah.
you have to value it, right? And you
Yes.
have to talk to your siblings about how. And I would say the positive gossip aspect is you have to kind of re-imbue it with the power
Mm.
and respect. If you're, I assume you already are, but this is what we have to do, I think, or I should
Right.
probably take that on myself is, I identify the elders that have helped me, the mentors, and almost none of them are from a officially authorized, credentialed, monetized setups. And these are the people that I try and get my friends and
Mm.
folks who talk to me. I get them to meet them, like my meditation teachers. And in the Buddhist tradition, there's no meant to be no monetization. Unfortunately, it's crept in all over. But the way we teach traditionally at the Dharma Center is teachers teach for free. The teaching is always free. This
Yeah.
gets us out of the idea of monetizing, and then people are doing something. It's some kind of reciprocal exchange. You pay and you get something. No, no. You have to be a good meditation student and you have to ask genuine questions, and then your teachers will answer and help. But this is not a monetized process any more than you talking to your grandmother is some kind of monetized process.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we kind of touched on this and you also explained. So maybe this practice of appreciative joy helps you um, to navigate the process, to navigate a world, to navigate your life activism of committing for causes that sometimes can get very lonely and very isolating.
Mm,
That's my
mm,
guess.
Yeah, yeah, you're right on there. And this is partly a product of capitalism itself, isn't it? It's meant to isolate us and then give us only kind of purchasable or, as one friend said to me once, the getting a paycheck every 2 weeks is my reward for all the suffering and isolation. And I think having it's having meditation practices help. I think in a variety of spiritual traditions. This is not unique to Buddhism. But as we said a minute ago, the more important is to rebuild the bonds between people. We're pack animals. We're meant to do things together. We're meant to unfold together. We're meant to build together. And so, and it's not going to happen overnight. Capitalism didn't arrive, wasn't created in a week. We can't change it in a week, but it's not everywhere. It hasn't successfully vanquished us. I think part of the thing we have to resist is the idea of giving it a premature victory, like thinking that we're in the last minute of the baseball game or something and the score is decided. No, it's not like that at all. And there are a lot of areas that capitalism hasn't crept into. Just you describing your relationship with your grandmother. There's a lot of areas we have to identify where there is good. There's a line from Paul Goodman that Gustavo Esteva, another really great, he calls himself a deprofessionalized intellectual. Gustavo Esteva, the great revolutionary thinker from Oaxaca. Anyway, he quoted Paul Goodman at a meeting once saying, imagine the revolution is over. We have a humane, kind, environmentally correct society. Okay, it's Thursday after the revolution. What do you do? And then he said, go try and do that now. Like, to what extent are we already having post-revolutionary moments? Like, to what extent are we already doing these things? And, the conversations we've had leading up to this, those are post-revolutionary moments, right? And this conversation, this isn't a capitalist thing. This is a post-revolutionary moment. If you and I were chatting in a coffee shop in Burnaby, we wouldn't be talking about some of these topics, but we'd be talking maybe in this kind of way. So I think that's part of the work, is to realize that we have a lot of these things available to us, these behaviors and understandings. There's nothing particularly Buddhist about appreciative joy. Anybody can do it. There's nothing particularly Buddhist about loving kindness or compassion. The key idea in those meditations is immeasurability, which is kind of what we were talking about in terms of your grandma. It's not measurable or monetizable, her wisdom and compassion. Obviously not. And what would you say? That her compassion is 4 pounds? It weighs 16 ounces? That it's located behind the left rib? There's no dimensionality, or it's not measurable. And it's not that it's vast, that it's, covers the whole universe. It's that those sorts of questions don't apply, that it isn't a measurable thing. And yet, it's the kind of force that could make her move across the world, or make students at universities across Canada suddenly, barge onto university grounds and set up tents and create encampments, right? And nobody's paying them to do it. And there's no measurement. You can't describe what that is or how much it weighs. And you can't find the source of it. This is why compassion is immeasurable. Loving kindness is immeasurable. These are the forces that are moving us, not university administrations and not curricula and not institutional instructions. And these things are such powerful forces in human life. This is what we ought to be cultivating and talking about and studying together. Whatever our religious traditions are, that's what we do. I was after I came out of retreat at 9/11, I used to work at a travel agency in Toronto, and across the street, I remember having to work on Christmas Day, and luckily there was a convenience store, and across the street, and I went in there and they were open, and I knew that the owner was Muslim. And I said, well, it's great that you're not Christian and closing on Christmas Day so I can have some place to get some food because I have to work today. And he said, oh, no, we're closing today, later on. We close on Christmas Day every year. I said, why are you closing? He said, well, because this is how we observe Christmas. Our imam has told us that on Christmas Day, our entire mosque goes out to give blood on Christmas Day. And I said, why? And he said, because our imam said, this is a gift you can give where you can't determine the religion or ethnicity of who gets it. It goes to everybody, and we're not limiting who it goes to. That's eliminable. That's an illimitable goal. That I remember feeling so moved by that. A
Absolutely.
practical, material expression of giving without limits and without restrictions, and knowing that the point is in the giving.
Yeah.
This is obviously present in, in spiritual traditions that have, this is why we're here as human beings, hundreds of thousands of years. These ideas have been what really
Mm.
grab us and move us. And when I was shocked to see in Newsweek last year that they said that the size of Gaza is equivalent to the size of Seattle. And if you could imagine every mosque, every school, every university, every hospital in Seattle destroyed, and jets bombing it dozens of times a day, and everyone within Seattle surrounded with a wall and being starved to death. That's what's being done right now in Gaza. And Canadian companies are contributing to that, building the parts for it. The Canadian government is covering for it. And, as time of recording, there was a humanitarian boat that was trying to get there just with diapers and baby formula and food. Last night it was boarded, and the 12 people on board were kidnapped by the Israeli military. And our government has a free trade agreement with that country. And our government is running cover for it. And, our universities meet, I hate to say it, but our university administrators, as recently as September, met with the ambassador from that country. In 1945, would our university administrators have met with the ambassador of Nazi Germany, committing a Holocaust? No, we wouldn't. This is this kind of manufacture of a consensus. I'm sorry to go into this direction, but this is a sign of the success of the institutional education system, is that it has this feigned neutrality when in fact it takes a side, and it's supporting this. And so, to return to that idea of the immeasurability, if you go to the Albert Einstein Institute, they have a post there of 198 methods of nonviolent direct action. It comes from Gene Sharp's book, but they post it there. It's great. Do you know what's not on that list? Encampments. The students created something that hadn't been done before. 198 methods, and they found a new one. And this is, I think, really important, is the scholar and activist Maya Dewar once said, the words reactive and creative have the same letters in them. Mm. We have to learn to do the creative. It's not just reacting to the wrongs that are going on. We need to be creative. And the immeasurable compassion of the students is really what I saw with those encampments, and their creativity, finding something, a method of resisting that hadn't been tried before. And frankly, galvanized all of our consciences and brought us to, and I don't know if you did, but I visited in the encampment at University of Toronto multiple times. And I'm just shocked at how far ahead these young people are compared to where I was when I was in my 20s. The intersectionality, the understanding of the issues, the connections, and the vast compassion and concern. And then the tactical wisdom, like they're not naive, understanding how to deal with state repression and surveillance. It just was super inspiring to see those combinations of deft wisdom, tactical smarts, and vast compassion and inclusivity was so inspiring. And so, I think the creative is more important than the reactive. Yeah. And
Thank you
that
so
is
much,
part.
Robert.
Yeah, sorry to talk over you. But
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No. Yeah, I realize that we're probably running out of time, so I should probably stop talking there.
Thank you so much, Derek. It's been such an illuminating conversation. Mm-hmm. It's always a pleasure talking to you and learning from you.
And vice versa. Thanks. It's been great.
And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for participating in ideas and sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us.
Thanks a lot.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation, this enlightening conversation. And there are many things that Derek talked about today, which I think that we need to practice in our daily life to cultivate the compassion and love, the moral courage to leave something behind us that is going to serve our next generation, that is going to be useful for our next generation. So thank you so much for supporting ideas, for listening to ideas, and please stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you all.